Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good evening. MPs have humiliated the government by voting to hold ministers in contempt of Parliament for the first time in history for refusing to publish the Attorney-General's full legal advice on Brexit. And an amendment has been passed that gives Parliament a greater say on the future direction of Brexit should the government be defeated on Tuesday. The pound is at a 17-month low on all of that news, and MPs have finally stated their Brexit deal debate, which is due to go on for 5 days. Just over an hour ago they started. Here's Gary Gibbon on one of the most turbulent parliamentary days in recent history. Gary.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
The government defeated by 18. Look at them, said a Labour MP.
Look at them. Look at them.
Thank you. She was looking at the faces of a government for the first time in history in contempt of Parliament. Individual MPs, like Charles Bradlaugh in 1881, have very rarely been found in contempt, then arrested and detained. But with a government in contempt, it was mooted a minister could face sanction. In the end, defeat made the government fold. It would, after all, publish the legal opinion it had refused to share.
And in light of the expressed will of the House, we will publish the final and full advice provided by the Attorney-General to Cabinet.
MPs called out when? Chief Whip leant over to Andrea Leadsom, and then came the answer.
The government will respond tomorrow, Mr. Speaker.
There were clear signs earlier that the government thought it was in danger.
Unless something very dramatically changes between now and the end of the debate, and I do have to leave the chamber, sir, as the Chief Whip would like to have a word with me.
It didn't work. He voted with Labour. Allies of the Attorney-General said they were deeply worried for his reputation.
And the result of what will happen today, if this amendment is passed, that the integrity and the reputation and the honour of a good man will be traduced. And that will be a disgrace of this House to do that, because any one of us may one day be in that position.
Geoffrey Cox couldn't hide his emotions. The Prime Minister had long since left number 10 for Parliament to start the 5-day debate to sell her deal. But her appearance was delayed even more as MPs debated an amendment, meaning if Theresa May's Brexit deal falls next week, MPs could instruct her on what to do next.
We could arrive on the 21st of January with a statement that no deal can be reached, and it could be that at that time there is across this House somewhere a majority in favour of some solution which would avoid us leaving without a deal. And for those of us who believe that leaving without a deal would be a catastrophe for our country, it seems right that we should at least have the chance to crystallise and express that majority should it arise.
Just behind the Speaker's chair, the cameras caught the Prime Minister on her way to the voting lobby. The government was overwhelmed by an even bigger defeat this time on what could be a hugely important vote.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 299.
There was no rest for Theresa May. Winded by defeat, she was straight to her feet, defending the deal against MPs stuck on pro-Remain or more strident Brexit positions.
I call the Prime Minister.
We can shut our eyes to these hard truths and carry on debating between these extremes for months to come. Or we can accept that the only solution that will endure is one that addresses the concerns of those who voted leave while reassuring those who voted remain. That this, I will take a number of interventions in a minute when I've just finished this. That this argument has gone on long enough. It is corrosive to our politics, and life depends on compromise. I take the honourable
Number 10 hoped that the defeat on the amendment that lets MPs choose Plan B if the government deal falls might just scare some Brexiteers back into the ranks. But there's only 1 week to win them over, and a big crowd of them to budge.
Gary Gibbon joins us now from Westminster. Gary, what a day. Tell us what, in the end, is the most significant thing that's happened.
so many crashes and bangs. What was the one with real importance? I think the melodramatic opening to the day, the proceedings on contempt, probably will remain a colourful episode in the history books, but not a chapter to itself. It seems to me that looking at what happened in there today, the Dominic Grieve Amendment, the one we were talking about in that piece, which is the one that if the government's main deal falls and they come back with a plan, with a statement to the House of Commons, that's the amendment that allows MPs to get together and impose their own plan B on the government. That seems to me the most important event of the day amongst some pretty strong challenges. And it was very interesting watching the chemistry happening around the House as that was becoming more and more of a possibility that that amendment would pass. And the people under pressure, the people who looked most nervous and edgy, were not government ministers, interestingly, but were the ERG, the European Research Group of pro-Brexit hardline MPs, the ones who are planning to vote down the Prime Minister's deal next week. They looked jumpy because they were beginning to worry that what could happen to the entire project of Brexit if things go off the rails. They are an uprising, remember, that is in favour of many of them. They've called it this privately. They call it the no deal uprising. They actually want to make sure that if Theresa May's deal fails, we come out on, as they would call it, WTO terms. They could see that amendment jeopardising their entire project.
So have the odds changed beneath her feet, and if they have, in which direction?
I think the government is hoping that exactly what I was talking about there has that pressure on Brexiteers will feed into the numbers when we get to a week's time and the vote on Tuesday. But it is not there yet. Theresa May has been carrying on her speech in the Commons, opening up this whole debate, talking to both sides of the debate, of the whole debate within the Conservative Party, with some civility, but telling them that they could unleash demons, unleash forces, if they've somehow between them managed to frustrate Brexit. I have to say some of the people who support the Prime Minister behind her are being a little less diplomatic when they speak to those rebels. It's not clear how all of that is going to pan out. One of them was turning to one of the rebels earlier and telling him to come in tomorrow morning and try sitting in the opposition benches, he said, because that's where you're going to put us.
Gary, for the moment, thank you very much indeed from Westminster. A little earlier, I spoke to the Northern Ireland Secretary, Karen Bradley. I began by asking her if the government had lost the confidence of the House.
Nobody ever wants to see a vote lost. You always want to see votes being won, and it's disappointing given that the Attorney-General did take that step yesterday, did publish that 50-odd pages of advice about the Brexit deal, and then came and answered questions. Again, something that happens incredibly rarely in Parliament. So it's disappointing people have acted the way they did, but we're now on to 5 days of debate. We're now on to actually the substance of this deal and what we want to deliver. And as someone who wants to see the result of the referendum delivered on, and I want to see Brexit happen, and I want to see it done in a way that is good for the United Kingdom, this deal is the only way to do that.
It does not bode well for tonight's unfolding developments.
The House has made a decision. It's disappointing. I'm not going to shy away from the fact it's disappointing, but we have got now to get on to the substance of the matter, which is the deal. We've got 40 hours of debate, and we want people to really think hard, really consider the position, speak to their constituents, go and visit those butchers, those bakers, those businesses around their constituencies. I know, as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, the message I'm getting on the streets of Northern Ireland and in the businesses of Northern Ireland is get this deal done, get it moving on, the safeguards are in place for the things people are concerned about.
The one breed of people you didn't mention is getting the confidence of MPs, let alone butchers and bakers up country. Surely the moment has come, and you've got the DUP who have now voted either against you or not voted at all in the finance debate. You've got them in 3 different votes in which they have failed to vote with you on critical matters, so you don't have a majority any longer in the House, and you've also got some of your own members actually supporting this motion today.
When I say speak to the butchers and bakers, I mean members of Parliament need to go and spend time in businesses, need to go and spend time with people, go and knock on some doors over the weekend, go and find out what people are saying. And what people are saying to me in Northern Ireland and in my own constituency is, please get on and deliver Brexit.
But
we are worried that we won't get Brexit, or we're worried that we will crash out with no deal. We want to see Brexit delivered, and we want to see it done in an orderly way that is not chaotic and is good for
the British economy. This deal delivers on that.
It is a quite extraordinary situation in which Sinn Féin, never the best of friends to the government, is supporting you, and the DUP, who are actually in alliance with you, are voting against you.
Well, there are those that have suggested that because one side or another might be supporting the deal, it must be bad for the other side. I say that that simply isn't the case, that there isn't a division here in terms of whether the deal is good for unionists or nationalists or neither. This is a deal that's good for everybody. And I urge people to look at the detail, look at what's actually been delivered and look at it in the round, look at the whole position. I hear from businesses across Northern Ireland, I hear from people across Northern Ireland, they want us to get on and deliver, and that this deal does deliver for them.
That was the Northern Ireland Secretary talking to me earlier. Well, I'm joined now by Dominic Grieve, whose amendment was approved this afternoon, giving MPs a say on what happens next if Parliament votes down the Prime Minister's deal. My deal, Dominic Grieve. Mrs May talking. My deal, no deal, or remain. Have you knocked no deal out?
What we've tried to do is to ensure that Parliament has an opportunity of expressing its view if the government's deal is rejected. And the previous arrangement, which provided for motions in neutral terms which were unamendable, was unacceptable to a large number of Conservative MPs and many others. And we've succeeded by this means in ensuring that we will get that debate. Obviously, it doesn't guarantee what the outcome will be, and I'm not seeking to guarantee a particular outcome. This is a process issue which was very important, and I wanted to make sure that we established now, particularly in view of the volatility of the situation, that we could have those informed debates if the government motion is defeated.
But what no one has established is whether Europe would continue a discussion after such a vote.
I'm quite confident that Europe will allow us the time to consider the options. That is the key issue. The key issue is whether we wish to potentially go back and speak to our European partners further. That may, in fact, be very difficult. I'm the first to acknowledge it. Do we want to try to find an alternative way forward? Do we wish to go back to the public and ask them if this is really what they want? All those are provided for by this amendment in procedural terms. It's then a matter for the House what it makes of it.
Now, you're a lawyer. Do we ignore the fact that the government has been found in contempt of Parliament?
The government has accepted Parliament's motion after being defeated again today and is going to supply the necessary documents. I don't think we need to take the matter much further than that. There's a lot of politics in this. And I have to say that my view remains that asking for the Attorney General's written opinions or advice to government is, there are good reasons why that shouldn't happen. But at the end of the day, the government's problem is it doesn't have a majority. And in those circumstances, it's going to have to give way because constitutionally it can't resist the House of Commons' will in this matter.
You said it, Dominic Grieve, a lot of politics in this. Are those politics such that they have considerably weakened Mrs May?
I have no desire to see Mrs May weakened.
I'm not asking that, I'm asking has it?
This is a very volatile situation. I'm not sure, actually, that you can be said that the Prime Minister has been weakened by today's events. If she wanted to draw upon what's happened today, she could strengthen her position. Ultimately, we need leadership to get us through what is a major and, I'm afraid, deepening political crisis. And I would like to see her provide that leadership.
Dominic Grieve, I know you've got to walk off and vote, so I must let you go. Thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Thank you.
Good evening. We're live at Westminster, where the Prime Minister has suffered a number of setbacks at the start of 5 days of debate ahead of the main Brexit vote next week. That is a vote that's billed as one of the most significant parliamentary events of recent times. Before the debate got underway, MPs held the government to be in contempt of Parliament because of its refusal to publish in full the legal advice on Brexit. Ministers were then forced to backtrack, and they promised to publish after all. Parliament also voted to have greater influence on the entire Brexit process if Mrs May's deal is defeated next week. And in yet another twist, the European Court of Justice was told that the UK could abandon Brexit without needing the agreement of other EU states. Well, the debate here at Westminster is expected to continue well into the night. We'll have reaction, we'll have analysis and all these developments. And we start with our political editor, Laura Kuensberg.
Parliament's time. The place where Theresa May must persuade. She doesn't want to accept she's defeated. Not yet. But for the first time in decades, before the Prime Minister had even had the chance to speak today, a painful hat-trick.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
Her government was beaten 3 times.
Look at them! Look at them!
Look at their faces, they cry. The sight of a government that doesn't have support it can rely on. Ministers found in contempt, forced now to publish the full Brexit legal advice.
This House has now spoken, and it's of huge constitutional and political significance. It is, I think, unprecedented for this House to find government ministers in contempt.
In light of the expressed will of the House, we will publish the final and full advice provided by the Attorney-General to Cabinet.
The Attorney-General's private advice to Cabinet will meet the public glare. Then another flank.
Mr Dominic Grieve. The purpose of this amendment is to ensure that if we don't resolve this issue next week, that there will be further amendable motions to be considered.
In other words, former Remain rebels demanded more power for Parliament if Theresa May's deal is rejected next week. And guess what happened next? An even bigger defeat. More influence for MPs if the government's plan falls.
How are the numbers looking?
But talk about brave faces.
I'm feeling very, very confident.
Looking forward to 5 days of Brexit debates?
Always looking forward to debate.
But multiple cabinet ministers say privately there's no way Parliament will back the government. A few brave souls inside think it might be possible. So what's her pitch?
I have spent nearly 2 years negotiating this deal. If I had banged the table, walked out of the room and at the end of the process delivered the very same deal that is before us today, some might say that I'd done a better job. But I didn't play to the gallery. I focused on getting a deal that honours the referendum, sets us on course for a bright future, and I did so through painstaking hard work. Don't let anyone here think that there's a better deal to be won by shouting louder. Don't imagine that if we vote this down, a different deal is going to miraculously appear. The alternative is uncertainty and risk. So I promise you today, this is the very best deal for the British people. I ask you to back it in the best interests of our constituents and our country. And with my whole heart, I commend this motion to the House.
This ordeal is about endurance as well as ideas and arguments.
To vote for this deal would be to damage our economy, to make our constituents poorer, and to take a leap in the dark for the future of this country. Mr. Speaker, Labour will vote against this deal. A bad deal for Britain, a bad deal for our economy, and, I believe, a bad deal for our democracy. Our country deserves better than this.
Remember, Theresa May has no majority on her own. Neither those meant to be her allies, the DUP, are on board, nor any of the opposition parties.
So under these terms, in my view, the UK's future as a strong and independent global trading nation standing together is in real and imminent jeopardy. An outcome that doesn't honour the result of the referendum or take back control of our laws, our money and our borders.
The reality of Brexit is now laid before us. Broken promises of taking back control from a government that is so out of control. 21 ministerial resignations, communities, countries, households divided, our politics stale, a Prime Minister fighting for her political life.
But the reason we're here is and always was the tears inside the Tory party, in full display tonight.
I really can't believe that there is a single member of this House who sincerely believes that this deal we have before us is a good deal for the UK.
There are a lot.
And if I may say, you can tell...
But look, there were.
There's one. There's one.
I've got no stake in this government anymore, but I still think it's the right thing to do.
Beneath the camouflage, we find the same old EU institutions as the customs union and the single market, and all of it adjudicated, by the way, by the European Court of Justice. If we vote for this deal, we will not be taking back control, but losing.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way.
He appears to be one of those who prefers the grievance to the solution. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has come up with a solution. What's his big idea?
I was coming to that.
I will not vote for this deal on any other basis than it goes to the people for their approval. This is not a good deal. In fact, it's not a deal, as many have already observed. It's certainly not what we were promised.
The governing party split in every direction, right in front of our eyes. A week tonight, they'll have to choose which way to go, which corridor to walk through. Is there a real chance of pulling together? Parties divided, Parliament divided, maybe the country too?
Shut out the noise. In the next few days, the Prime Minister will be arguing for her Brexit compromise, her government, and her job. Many behind her want to make her ditch her plan for departure, but those opposite want to go further, to force her out. The government will strain everything to make its case to survive. But ultimately, it's this place, Parliament, that will decide.
It feels like this place, what's meant to be all of our place, is taking charge. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So many developments to talk about tonight. In a moment, we'll be talking to Darshini David, our economics correspondent, about the latest warnings from the Bank of England. We'll also be talking to Damien Grammaticus, our correspondent in Brussels, about the events at the European Court of Justice. But first, let's talk to our political editor, Laura Kunzberg, who's with me as well. Laura, defeat after defeat for the Prime Minister today, a big day of setbacks.
Huge, and you have to go back to the 1970s for its equivalent. And actually, even though Theresa May has had so much turmoil, so many travails over the last year and a half, she's only actually been beaten in this way twice before. So a huge day, this hat-trick of humiliation for the Prime Minister, all of it happening before she had to get to her feet to even begin making her case.
And if you're going to focus on one of them, would it be the motion brought forward by Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General?
It certainly would, and just remind people really clearly what that was about. Essentially, MPs today voted to give themselves more power if and when the Prime Minister's deal with Brussels is rejected. Now, right now, that looks like it is what is going to happen. So essentially, MPs have decided today, overruling the government, that they will have more power to set the course of the government to go for a plan B. And I think what we saw in broad terms today is what will really send a chill up Number 10's spine, is the legislature, Parliament, taking control over the government.
Laura, we'll talk again later. Thanks very much. Laura Kunzberg there for us. Let's go straight to Brussels and talk to Damien, who's there. Damien, let's talk about the European Court of Justice today and that opinion that was expressed there. Tell us about that and what impact it could have.
Hugh, yes, on a day when the Prime Minister told MPs that the choice they faced was her deal or uncertainty, what we've heard today opens up a route that's certain, possibly, for Parliament if it comes to pass, which would be to cancel Brexit. Now, this concerns a case brought by opponents of Brexit in the UK that's been considered by the European Court of Justice. Today, we had the advice from the court's highest legal advisor saying that he believes it is possible for the UK as a sovereign country to cancel Brexit unilaterally without needing the approval of the other EU 27 countries. Now, there are caveats. He said that this would probably have to have some parliamentary approval and it would have to be in good faith, not just for buying time. But what it does do, if it's confirmed by the highest court, is open up a potential exit route for MPs to consider in the future. Hugh.
Damien, many thanks. Back here at Westminster, Darshini is with me. Bank of England with some warnings today. Tell us about those.
10% on your weekly food bill, Hugh, in the event of a disorderly Brexit. That was the latest stark warning from the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. Why is that? Well, we import about half of our food. If we do see a disorderly Brexit, we're going to see perhaps a slump in sterling, tariffs, costs of checking things on the border. All of those will bump up costs across the board. Now, Mark Carney talking to MPs here in Westminster at the Treasury Select Committee. This is on the back, of course, of those warnings about the possibility of an 8% fall in GDP if we have a disorderly Brexit. Is he scaremongering? Well, Mr Carney today was at pains to say, no, he is not. He is doing his job. He's delivering assessments that the MPs themselves wanted. It is his job to warn of risks and to make sure the financial system can cope with that. The financial markets, however, clearly share his concerns about the impact of a disorderly Brexit. What we saw today, after we had that vote, pushing through that amendment from Dominic Grieve, we saw sterling bounce right up, reversing a 17-month low against the dollar, which it reached earlier in the day when we saw that earlier defeat.
Darshini, many thanks again. Laura, we'll talk later. And thanks to Damien, of course, in Brussels too. I must mention another development today because the BBC has dropped plans to hold a Brexit debate between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, saying that it could not reach an agreement on its particular proposal. ITV says its offer is still open for a debate. We'll have more from Westminster later in the programme.
Ever since Theresa May came up with a deal many of them frankly hate, the most pro-Brexit of Tory MPs have favoured the idea of a no-deal exit, a clean break as they would put it, unless the EU can be persuaded, of course, to give us a much better deal. But today, that dream might have died, with power decisively shifting to MPs as a whole from Theresa May and arguably even her party. The first development was an opinion handed down by the European Court in Luxembourg, and we'll come to that in just a moment. But arguably of even greater significance were the tumultuous events in Parliament itself. Well, as you can see, this is the scene there now, where they are debating into the night. But the real drama was this afternoon, when the government conspired to lose 3 votes in the space of only an hour. One accused it of contempt of Parliament, the first time in history that's ever happened. But another, much more significant in the long run, gave MPs a potentially decisive say over the direction of travel if Mrs May loses that vote on Tuesday night.
Seasonal cheer for the Prime Minister.
Is your government in contempt of Parliament, Prime Minister?
Well, she left Downing Street looking grim for very good reason, because what unfolded today was her worst day as Prime Minister since she lost a majority in that ill-fated general election.
I call Keir Starmer.
It began badly, with Labour and all the opposition parties, including her supposed partners in government, Northern Ireland's DUP, trying to enforce an earlier ruling that she publish legal advice she received from her attorney on her controversial Brexit plan.
The issue before us is simple. This House passed a binding order. The government is willfully refusing to comply with that order. That is contempt of Parliament.
So here is the attorney, Sir Geoffrey Cox, looking, well, just a bit sad that Parliament might well be about to find him guilty of the heinous crime of contempt.
And the honour of a good man will be traduced.
How did it turn out?
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
So a humiliating defeat for him and for the Prime Minister, who will now have to publish that confidential advice probably tomorrow. And according to the government's theoretical allies from the DUP, that's not the end of it.
The government set its face against us. Another example of number 10 not listening. And as long as they don't listen, they're going to head to more defeats in Parliament.
And indeed, it wasn't the end of it today.
The Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom.
After the start of 40 hours of debate on May's Brexit plan.
I believe that the Prime Minister's negotiation delivers on the Brexit priorities that this country voted for.
Because this Tory MP,
Mr Dominic Grieve,
decided to amend the government's motion to give MPs more power to decide the UK's Brexit or even no Brexit future.
The reality remains that we have an unsatisfactory procedure to resolve differences of opinion in this House if, and obviously it's an if, we come to a point where the government does not succeed on its motion.
And another unlikely Tory rebel spelled out what it was all about.
For those of us who believe that leaving without a deal would be a catastrophe for our country, it seems right that we should at least have the chance to crystallise and express that majority should it arise.
So who won this time? The PM or the Rebel Alliance?
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 299.
Yep, she lost again. Although when at last she came to make her case for her Brexit plan, you wouldn't have guessed it.
This argument has gone on long enough. It is corrosive to our politics, and life depends on compromise.
Now, her colleagues say she hasn't compromised enough on the so-called backstop which they hate, which is designed to keep open the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And she insisted she's still listening.
There are members of this House who remain concerned. I have listened to those concerns. I want us to consider how we could go further, and I will be continuing to meet colleagues to find an acceptable solution. We should not let the search for the perfect Brexit prevent a good Brexit that delivers for the British people.
Here's one opponent.
This is not the deal the country was promised, and Parliament cannot, and I believe will not, accept it. The false choice between this bad deal and no deal will also be rejected.
Here's another.
Listening to those who are sent out to defend it and to explain it, they know that it is a democratic disaster. It has brought us together and said Remainers and Leavers, myself, Tony Blair, we are united. The whole Johnson family is united in the belief that this is I'm afraid, a national humiliation.
A cowed Prime Minister. In fact, she lost 3 votes today, almost as many as some Prime Ministers suffer throughout their careers. But the big one, the big vote, is still a week away. There's still time, but not a lot of hope. She can turn it round. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Well, so, as we said a moment ago, just when it started to seem as if the options for Brexit were narrowing to Mrs May's plan on one side or leaving without a deal on the other, a third one has potentially opened up, that of no Brexit after all. The European Court of Justice proposed that the UK should be allowed to change its mind and stay in without having to get the agreement of the other 27 EU members. Well, if that opinion is confirmed, it might make the big vote in the Commons a week from now even more complicated.
It's not a final verdict, but it is a very good pointer to what these judges may soon decide. Everyone agrees that Britain can change its mind, withdraw Article 50 and stay in the EU. But Brussels wants a veto to say that Article 50 can only be cancelled if the other 27 countries agree. The opinion from the court's Advocate General today says no, there is no veto. If Britain genuinely wants to stay in, it can do so whenever it likes.
When a member state has notified the European Council of its intention to leave the EU, Article 50 admits the unilateral revocation of this notification up until the moment that the withdrawal agreement has been concluded.
The significance of that, say lawyers who supported this case, is that Brussels could not scrap the opt-outs and rebates we currently enjoy as a condition of staying in.
MPs can just choose to cancel Brexit, and it really would be as simple as that. By a majority, they can tell the institutions in the EU that we no longer wish to go through with Brexit, and we would keep the benefit of our rebate, of our opt-out of Schengen, we'd keep control of our borders. It would be like Brexit was all just a bad dream.
For the 700,000 or so who demonstrated recently in London for what they call a people's vote, this opinion, if confirmed, will be good news, not least because, as those who want Parliament rather than the government to be in control, it gives MPs a way out of the Theresa May's deal or no deal dilemma.
It does open up a third way. It opens up a possibility of revoking Article 50 for the MPs, and then I think having a people's vote, and if the vote is to leave, a clear run for 2 years to actually negotiate a no-deal exit if that's what people want. Because at the moment, we're not prepared for no deal on the 30th of March.
The judges are expected back here in the European Court in just a matter of weeks, either to confirm today's opinion, as they're expected to, or come up with one of their own. This whole thing has been rushed through in record time because they are fully aware of the political significance of their decision. There are many ifs and hypotheticals in all this, and the court's final ruling may end up not meaning very much. But it does give the UK and its Parliament more control over just what might happen next. James Mates, News at 10 at the European Court in Luxembourg.
Right, so if all that was just the case, as James was saying there, a no-deal exit appears firmly off the table then. But is it really? As we've rehearsed many times on this programme, it is what will happen if nothing else intervenes. Confused? Well, you're not alone. Rachel Younger is here to explain it all.
For the past few weeks, Brexit has sometimes felt like a one-woman show.
Today was the moment when Parliament, the place that represents us, got right back in on the act. And that may well change what happens after next week's vote. If Parliament rejects May's deal on Tuesday, she has 21 days to come back to the Commons with a new plan of action. Now, we don't know what Downing Street's plan B is, and whatever it is, it could be something MPs agree to. But after the majority voted to back Dominic Grieve's amendment today, we do know that Parliament may be able to influence the government on what its next steps should be if there's a second vote. And while hardline Brexiteers may argue any amendments wouldn't be legally binding, politically speaking, they will be far harder for the Prime Minister to ignore. So if the first vote doesn't go the Prime Minister's way, how could MPs impose their own demands on the government in the event of a second vote? Well, they might call for the option of a second referendum. That's possibly easier now, after the European Court of Justice today advised the UK that we could, if we wanted, change our minds on leaving the EU at all, whatever the rest of Europe thinks. Now, MPs may want the choice of staying in a closer relationship with the EU, a single market or a permanent customs union. Or they could simply rule out any option of a no-deal Brexit. Either way, Parliament's hand has today been strengthened.
It's still months away, and I think there's lots and lots of room for parliamentary negotiation between now and then to agree alternative motions, to agree an alternative deal, to perhaps even have a vote of no confidence in the government and see a new government. There are lots of mechanisms that MPs could use to prevent us simply dropping out in a few months' time.
Today's events have moved us so quickly into uncharted waters that making any firm prediction is all but impossible. But the Brexit countdown is impervious to all of this. And if our politicians reject May's deal and can't come up with a workable alternative, then the only thing currently written in law is that in 115 days, on the 29th of March, we'll be leaving the EU, deal or not.
Or Rachel Younger there with deal or no deal. Now, you will recall the debate about the TV debate, which has been, I guess, a kind of metaphor for Brexit itself, really, with Theresa May saying yes to the BBC and Jeremy Corbyn to ITV. But today, a bit of a twist. The BBC pulled out, dropping its plan altogether. A touch bizarre, perhaps? What is going on? Paul is here to explain it all. Paul, so are we going to have a debate? Are we not going to have a debate? What's happening?
I think the only debate you're definitely going to get on TV, Tom, are those clips from the Commons, and it really is up to the Prime Minister now to decide whether, after facing the glare of MPs in Parliament, whether she wants to face the glare of the TV cameras. After all, it was her idea to use a shiny floor and some dazzling lights for a bit of a showbiz sell of her Brexit plan, and that was before, of course, there was this row over the format. She preferred the BBC's idea of having a head-to-head, but also supplemented by this panel of 8 politicians and public figures with a range of views on Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn prefers ITV's idea of just a straightforward one-to-one. Today, the BBC conceded it couldn't get agreement on its format, so it's pulled out. Tonight, ITV says its offer remains open, and both leaders are saying they still want a debate on Sunday, but Downing Street is still quibbling over the format. As I say, though, after they threw down the gauntlet, I think perhaps not a great look if they're the ones to back away. But look, both leaders are accusing one another of running scared here. We'll have to see whether anyone ends up running a debate.
Paul, it's a tiny bit farcical, is it not? But thank you very much.
Talking of farce.
Talking of farce, it's a good moment to bring Robert in here. Look, we've talked a lot on this programme already, you in your report and me in the headlines, about this big amendment, the so-called Grieve amendment that changes things a bit. Can you just explain exactly why you think this changes things?
So there are 2 issues, right? What it does do is it gives the MPs the power to amend whatever the Prime Minister brings back to the Commons if her deal is thrown out next Tuesday, right? Yeah. Until this amendment, she was under an obligation to bring back a plan within 21 days, but MPs were not allowed to amend that plan, OK? Boiling it down, what it means is that MPs can certainly vote as Oliver Letwin, who's on the whole seen as a May loyalist, can certainly vote to show that they don't want a no-deal Brexit. It would be very, very hard for the government to ignore a motion where MPs say we don't want a no-deal Brexit, even though I've got to be absolutely clear about this, that motion would not be binding, OK? Similarly, if MPs can get their act together, and this is the big issue, can they coalesce around a kind of Brexit they want? Do they want the Norwegian model? Again, Oliver Letwin says that's what he wants. Lots of MPs would rather have a referendum. Now, if MPs could get their act together and say this is what we want, again, they could have a motion on that. Very hard for the government to ignore. So MPs have got some power now. What they also would require, if they're going to have an influence, is a view, a sort of consensus, which they haven't got.
No, OK. But nevertheless, is Theresa May now going to use this, you know, to effectively really push her Brexiteers in saying, listen, if you don't vote for my deal, you're not going to get anything?
She is going to try that. I have to say, Brexiters tonight say to me that they smell a rat. They think the whips were in the form of skullduggery, actually encouraging these rebels to get this through so that she could say, you don't vote for me, you don't get Brexit. They say there is steel in their soul. They are still going to vote against her. And I have to say right now, I think she will lose, partly because the Brexiters have got it into their heads that she is about, after she loses, to go back to Brussels and try and get a better deal. They think they have detected the early signs of talk. So I think she will lose on Tuesday, and then we'll see. Does she go back to Brussels? Does she come back with a different plan? Gosh, it's exciting.
Well, it is. It's going to be, let's be honest, a fascinating week. And the Brexit debate goes on into the night, and we are streaming it live on our website if you would like to follow it. Now, and the last word on Brexit tonight goes to arguably the man who started it all, Nigel Farage, who decided today was the day to announce he is leaving UKIP, which of course he led 3 times. He said he was uncomfortable with the direction the party had taken recently under the leadership of Gerard Batten. Mr Farage said that included appointing the English Defence League founder Tommy Robinson as an advisor, and what Mr Farage called Mr Batten's obsession with Islam.
This was definitely not what Theresa May would have wished for her first big day of the Brexit debate. As we go on air, as many calculations and arguments about the future of the Brexit deal are being made in the tea rooms and bars of Westminster, as are being made during the debate going on right now in the chamber. Today, Parliament gave government a bloody nose. It has the ignominy now of being the first government in history to be found in contempt of Parliament. So is that Parliament in charge of our destiny now and not Theresa May's creaking government? I'm joined from Westminster by our political editor, Nick Watt. Nick, what's the latest?
Well, a very big day in Parliament. As you say, this sets up a tussle over who rules Britain, Parliament or the government. Now, under our constitution, Parliament is sovereign, but the government runs the show with the consent of Parliament. And today, Theresa May felt the cold blast of a minority government with, as you say, that humiliating defeat when her government was found in contempt of Parliament. Now, this Prime Minister is used to being humiliated. And interestingly today, there may be some upsides. And during a seminal day in Parliament, some of those upsides emerged. It was the day when Parliament, to coin a phrase, took back control. The government suffered major defeats, which could shape the nature of Brexit and how Britain is governed.
The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 311.
That was the first of 3 defeats, which saw ministers declared in contempt of Parliament after refusing to publish the full legal advice on Brexit. Labour said this was unprecedented in modern parliamentary history, and it had an immediate impact.
We've listened carefully, and in light of the expressed will of the House, we will publish the final and full advice provided by the Attorney-General to Cabinet.
And then, in perhaps the most important moment of the day, MPs gave Parliament new teeth if Theresa May's Brexit deal is rejected.
321. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
MPs would then be able to table alternative plans. It's been 40 years since a government lost so many votes on one day. But ministers are wondering whether this might actually help Theresa May. One cabinet minister said to me, this is a wake up and smell the coffee moment for Brexiteers. Do they really want to vote down the Prime Minister's deal and, after today, risk Parliament voting for a much softer Brexit?
that history has set.
Theresa May opened the Brexit debate with an impassioned defence of her deal.
But looking around this chamber, I know we can meet this moment. So I promise you today, this is the very best deal for the British people. I ask you to back it in the best interests of our constituents and our country. And with my whole heart, I commend this motion to the House.
And the single market, all of it.
Boris Johnson struggled to command the House.
If we vote for this deal, we will not be taking back control, but losing.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He appears to be one of those who prefers the grievance to the solution. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has come up with a solution. What's his big idea?
One Tory rebel on Brexit believes Parliament is flexing its muscles.
I think, yes, Parliament is beginning to say to the Prime Minister, you have to get this deal through us and you have to listen to Parliament. And I think everybody, whether you voted for Leave or Remain, it was always about parliamentary sovereignty. And so the inconvenience for the Prime Minister is that she lost her majority here in Parliament. As Parliament takes back control, she doesn't have a majority, which is why I've encouraged her to go for a free vote next week to respect that and to give every MP a chance to vote on conscience.
A Brexiteer thinks the government defeat should not be overblown.
I would say Parliament's teeth are not that sharp because the Grieve Amendment only looks at process. That process only comes into play if the government agrees it. And there is a negative as well as a positive, because if, at the end of the day, the Grieve Amendment leads to a vote on no deal, and he succeeds, i.e. Parliament says we don't want a no deal, then it gives rise to a much bigger constitutional crisis. So where do we go from here?
One Labour MP believes today's vote on Brexit will kill off one option.
I think no deal was always dead, but it's dead in the water. Because there isn't a majority in Parliament for no deal, and I also think the government doesn't want to lead us down that path because it would be catastrophic. They've already said that we would have to stockpile medicines. They've already said that this is going to be very, very bad for the country. I didn't believe for a minute that the government wants us to leave the EU without a deal.
A new Parliament able to challenge and even humiliate the government took shape in front of our eyes today. Perhaps this will prove a mixed blessing for a beleaguered Theresa May, who could find that Parliament has handed her a lifeline on Brexit. Well, Kirsty, the big question tonight is where does this leave Theresa May? Now, at one level, she's hobbled. This vote means that Parliament may be able to shake Brexit if her deal is voted down. But on another level, she could well be helped. I was speaking to one Brexiteer tonight who said, I was thinking of voting down this deal. I may now have to vote for it, because if I don't, the effect of that Dominic Grieve amendment could be that we get a much softer Brexit. And interestingly, when that amendment came up for a vote, remember, this is technically a rebel amendment against the government. I'm told that one member of the cabinet was in the lobby high-fiving other Tory MPs, absolutely delighted. And I spoke to one minister who said, this may look like a dreadful day for Theresa May, but actually it was a rather good day in the office.
Nick, well, thanks very much indeed. Well, today too, the European Court of Justice, after a query led by the Scottish National Party, issued advice that if we wanted to call the whole thing off, we wouldn't have to beg for mercy from one single one of the 27 other EU nations. Brexit could simply become Nexit. Well, I'm joined by our business editor, Helen Thomas. What actually did the ECJ say today?
Well, so this was a legal opinion by the ECJ's top advisor, and the opinion isn't binding. We have to wait for the court ruling, but the court does follow the opinion in the majority of cases. Now, what it said is that a country can unilaterally revoke its notification that it wants to withdraw from the EU under Article 50. So, if the court takes the same view, the UK could just take back its intention to leave without the agreement of the other member states. Now, a couple of things. You can't use this just to play for time, because to extend Article 50 does require unanimous consent on the other side, and there would probably be some conditions attached so that you can't game the system. It has to be a genuine intention that you're going to stay. And there's a lot of debate about how this could or might or would be used in reality. But the bottom line is that if the court agrees with this opinion, it's a tool that could be used without EU agreement to avoid no deal and to stay in the EU.
Just call the whole thing off.
Exactly.
OK, so how did the markets react to all the parliamentary drama today?
Well, so you need to look at the pound. That's the barometer. When the chances of no deal fall, the pound goes up and vice versa. This is the chart of today. And what you will be able to see shortly is that the pound rose on there we go. The pound rose on the ECJ opinion this morning, started to fall, and then really sort of fell off when you had the government defeated later in the day. The Grieve Amendment helped reverse things, and the pound rose a bit again. Now, it ended pretty much flat on the day, which sounds desperately unexciting, but actually there was a huge amount of information to process in there. So, to the extent that the ECJ opinion and the Grieve Amendment make no deal less likely, that's positive for the pound. If you think that the May government is weakened, that there's greater chances of a leadership challenge, maybe that isn't so good for the pound. But ultimately, to avoid no deal, it's not enough for all these people to be against it. You actually have to have these groups of people come together and be for something. And at the moment, it's not quite clear what that something is.
Helen, thanks very much indeed. Well, so amongst the morass of Brexit-related politics of the last 4 years, today will definitely be one for the history books. The day Parliament seized hold of Brexit. A little earlier, I spoke to the Education Secretary, Damien Hinds, and asked him whether this had been one of the worst days for Theresa May's government.
Well, these were always going to be difficult times. And yes, this has been a day with a couple of difficult things in it. But what the Prime Minister's focused on is making the case for this deal, making the case for us being able to move forward, being able to get on with Brexit, delivering on the referendum result, but in a way which is good for the economy and good for people's jobs. And she carries on doing that, and I think actually very effectively.
But here we have Parliament virtually in control. So what was worst? Being the first government to be found in contempt of Parliament? Or was it losing the Grieve Amendment? Or was it the European Court of Justice not ruling, but advice that actually Britain could happily get back into the fold, never leave the fold without a moment's notice? Or was it not having a debate in the BBC? Which of these was worst?
Well, look, these are not welcome things, Kirsty, clearly. But, we've got 5 days of debate coming up to the meaningful vote. The Prime Minister opened that debate today. We're going to have a full exposition of the case. We'll have plenty of holding to account, plenty of discussion and debate about what the alternatives are. And I think that's a really important thing for focusing minds, because, there is one deal on the table. If that were not to be passed, then I think we go into a period of some uncertainty about what would happen instead.
The mood music, Parliament has really got the bit between its teeth. The mood music is not moving in any way other than inflicting a defeat on the Brexit deal, the only deal there is, next Tuesday.
Well, look, Parliament's always got the bit between its teeth. We are a parliamentary democracy, and that's what we do. The government comes to the House of Commons, has to give an account of itself, is held to account by members of Parliament, acting on behalf of their constituents, and they've got to think about what's right for those people in their constituencies and what's in the national interest.
But right now you have a Prime Minister, and a Prime Minister would normally command a majority in Parliament. She can't command anything. She can't command a majority.
Well, look, Kirsty, these are very difficult subjects. We had a referendum campaign, which was, very hard fought on both sides. These are matters on which always parliamentarians have had very strong views, and we have robust debate. But my encouragement to all of my colleagues in the Conservative Party, and indeed members of Parliament in other parties, is to think about what the alternatives are. There is this deal. If we don't get this deal, there's two other things could happen. Either you could have no deal, and that would not be good for us, or you might end up with no Brexit at all. And for individual MPs, we can't guarantee which of those other two alternatives might happen if the deal doesn't go through.
What about this? Are you gaming this scenario that actually the Dominic Grieve Amendment might play reasonably well for Theresa May, because you'll have the ERG so scared of that Dominic Grieve Amendment that they'll actually vote for the deal?
Well, look, I think, in the hypothetical scenario in which the meaningful vote did not get passed, then I think Parliament would anyway have found a way to have an active role in what happens next. And yes, I think it probably does help to focus minds that a combination of that amendment today, which formalises that process, but also the opinion that you mentioned earlier in the list you were reading out of the opinion given by the Adjudicator General, that will give comfort and hope to people who think they can stop Brexit altogether. And so for those who want, like me, who want to honour the referendum result and deliver on it, that should give them pause for thought and to help them to get behind this deal.
So will you be saying to all the ERG, you know, you better vote for this deal because this is the hardest Brexit you're going to get? Because if you're on the way with the Dominic, if you vote against next Tuesday and then you have the Dominic Grieve amendment, you know, you're not going to get any harder deal than you would get this Tuesday. Is that the line? Is that the line the whips are using?
Well, I'm saying it's the best Brexit you're going to get rather than it's the hardest or some other thing. This is about having a good economic relationship with our near neighbours in Europe and being able to trade with the rest of the world. If we don't get this deal through, the point is you can't predict accurately what will happen afterwards. It's easy for everyone to make an assumption that things would move in their direction, but they might not. They might move in the other direction. And that, as I say, should focus minds.
Well, I'll tell you what will be focusing your mind is the DUP. And the DUP made it perfectly plain today they are very happy to have an election in Northern Ireland. You cannot be sure of the DUP support. What are you going to offer them? How can you support? How can you get the DUP on side?
Well, I think this is a good deal for the whole of the United Kingdom, and it does deliver for the whole of the United Kingdom. It also specifically delivers for Northern Ireland. And, you know, we know there's multiple reasons why
you're not making that argument. The DUP aren't buying that argument.
I'm making it now. Kirsty, I'm making it now.
So
there are multiple reasons, as you know, why the backstop should not come into force at all. But even if it did, we now have a position which the EU were not previously entertaining, but we now have a position in the backstop. There will be a UK-wide customs area. And also, of course, let's not forget the whole concept of the backstop is an insurance policy to make sure that there can be no return to a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, and that is something in which all communities in Northern Ireland, I think, are heavily invested, and it's something that should and does matter to everyone.
Damien Hinds, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let's go live now to the House of Commons, where the debate is still going on. In a moment, we'll be talking to leading Conservative Brexiteer Bernard Jenkins. But first, we can talk to a Conservative from the Remain wing, Dominic Grieve, whose successful amendment today could lead to Parliament taking control of the Brexit process. Good evening to both of you. First of all, Dominic Grieve, can I just pick up on the effect of the amendment? Effectively, the amendment takes the route to a no deal off the table, and it probably makes it more likely that a deal that you think that's bad for Britain is going to get through next Tuesday.
I don't agree with that analysis. It seems to me, firstly, it doesn't put no deal off the table. What it actually does is to ensure that if the government's deal is rejected, Parliament has an opportunity of bringing forward itself and debating alternatives, whereas the original way the government had structured this meant that Parliament's ability to do that was rather limited. Now, how Parliament chooses to use that is a matter for the House of Commons, but it gives the House of Commons greater flexibility. What the outcome may or may not be is another matter.
But you know that the idea of a no deal would not command the majority support in Parliament.
That has been the case even before this amendment was tabled. And as I've indicated on previous occasions, even if I hadn't been successful with this amendment, I think it's a helpful amendment, that's why I promoted it. But even if it weren't there, I'm absolutely convinced that Parliament did have means of asserting its own views if it wished to do so. It's a question of bringing Parliament together to actually discuss, debate and determine what's for the best in a dialogue with the government.
But how would you've got Bernard Jenkins beside you, and I'll come to him in a moment because I know you don't actually want to have a discussion, but how would you sell this to a member of the ERG? Would you be saying to Bernard Jenkins, this is the toughest Brexit deal you're going to get, so you better support it next Tuesday?
No, that's not what I would be saying. I mean, ultimately, my ERG colleagues are parliamentarians and they're also Democrats, and I'm quite sure that they're quite sincerely trying to do what they think is best for the country. But you can't close down debate and dialogue in Parliament. And just because the 2016 referendum result produced a particular result, Parliament has to try to interpret that, try to work with it, but also has to make sure that we don't, in fact, take people into a future which nobody wants. So as long as we do that, we will get a successful debate and dialogue, which is what I'm hoping we'll be able to achieve. But it's not helped if you try to close down avenues of debate.
So you want a no deal next week, and then you want your amendment then to come to the fore. But you know there's no vote. So you know that actually a no vote in the deal will not necessarily lead to a direct and clear decision about what will be next.
All these things are difficult, and I recognise that, but you've also got to bear in mind that if we go ahead and approve the government's deal, we will leave on the 29th of March on the terms of that deal. And my own judgment, and it may actually be a judgment shared by Bernard Jenkin, you'll have to ask him in a moment, is that the deal is really not a good one. It has very damaging aspects for the future of our country. And if that's what people want, those terms for leaving, well, so be it. But it's not something I'm prepared to sanction as a Member of Parliament.
Well, let's turn to Bernard Jenkin now. Has anything that's happened today made it any more likely that you would vote for a deal that already you said you wouldn't vote for?
Well, I'm in a surprising degree of agreement with my friend Dominic Grieve that this does give the opportunity for the House to express more opinion at a later stage. But the House always had that opportunity, and it hasn't changed the fact that the only thing that can stop us leaving on the 29th of March is a change in the law. And there has been no change in the law today. There's been a change in procedure, but no change in the law, and no motion on the floor of Parliament, however carried, can actually alter the law and alter the fact that we're leaving on the 29th of March. There has to be a change in the law to prevent the United Kingdom leaving. So this is a lot of noise, if you like, because what's really happening here, Kirsty, of course, is the people came to a conclusion that many parliamentarians do not like. And if parliamentarians finish up standing in the way of the decision of the British people, that might have very dangerous consequences.
But let's be quite clear, Bernard Jenkin, what you're actually saying in a very long, round and clear way is that you will be voting against this deal next Tuesday, and all the Brexiteers of the ERG will be doing so. Nothing has changed.
Well, I don't think anything has changed.
Right.
I think this was an exercise to try and frighten, if you like, people like me into supporting the government, saying that this is the best you're going to get. And that's obviously the briefing that's been sent out very strongly from Number 10. And I even hear you echoing some of that in your questions. But the fact is, unless the law changes, then we're leaving on the 29th of March, with or without an agreement.
So, as far as you're concerned, nothing that's on the table now is better than leaving on a no deal.
Well, I agree with my colleague Dominic Grieve that this is a bad deal. The top line badness of this deal is, at the moment, the United Kingdom has the unilateral right to leave the European Union. As the Attorney General confirmed to the House of Commons yesterday, the UK has no unilateral right to leave the arrangements under the withdrawal agreement, and therefore it's giving up control, not taking back control.
Just one final question, Bernard Jenkin. Do you think the Conservative Party can survive this?
Well, once again, we're seeing the leadership of the Conservative Party fighting to maintain a policy which the majority of the party really does not want.
So the answer is no.
I think unless the government changes heart and sticks to its original plan, as Theresa May set out in her Lancaster House speech and other speeches much earlier, then I'm afraid this is not very good news for the Conservative Party, because the vast majority of Conservative voters voted leave, the vast majority of Conservative constituencies voted leave, and at least half the party voted leave in Parliament. And most people want to leave. And incidentally, half the party voted leave, even though David Cameron and George Osborne were trying to persuade them to vote Remain.
Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Well, later in the programme, we are going to be asking our trio of political commentators to game the next moves of their very different political factions. But right now, their reaction to Parliament's regained sense of itself. First of all, Bronwyn Mannix, what do you make of what happened today?
Well, I think it was a big day. It's not a constitutional crisis, but I think it's a political crisis. The government has had it seems to me, one blow against it, forcing it to publish the legal advice, which it said it's going to tomorrow, is probably going to make for another very difficult day for Theresa May, because it's going to reveal some of the probably very unattractive things about this deal to many members of Parliament, whether they were on the Remain side or on the Brexit side, and particularly homing in on whether Britain might be trapped in this backstop about Ireland and not able to get out. And I think it's really going to shine a spotlight on that. But as you've been discussing, this is also, it seems to me, a very difficult day for the Brexit lobby, for the European, the ERG group, because it is shaping up to give them a very difficult choice between backing, Theresa May's deal or possibly seeing Brexit taken away from them.
But you heard Bernard Jenkins there. He seems to be pretty resolute, Ian Dale.
I don't think today will have changed many votes. There may have been the odd people flaking off at the edges, but today was the day that Parliament, to coin a phrase, took back control. And I think that is going to have quite severe consequences over the next few weeks. What those consequences will be, I mean, who knows? I think that the vote next week is going to be cataclysmic for Theresa May. Now, we all know that she's resilient, stoic and all the rest of it, but if she can really survive losing a vote by 50, 100, possibly even over 100 votes, it will be a miracle of modern politics.
Well, just very briefly, Paul Mason, on the Dominic Green amendment, what do you think the impact of that's actually going to be?
Well, I just think the whole day has been about Parliament gaining power. And Bernard Jenkins there says the will of the people. The Supreme Court last year made it very clear the will of the people resides in Parliament, and the people will that the government reveal the legal advice and give the MPs control over the process. That's a big constitutional moment, regardless of whether it's about Brexit or anything else.
Well, we're going to come back to you to actually game where you think the power lies and where it might move to over the next... You can't wait, I know you can't wait. But we're going back to Westminster now, where I see Ed Vaizey is on his feet at Westminster, but we're going to be joined by Richard Bergen, who is Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary. Thank you very much for joining us, Richard Bergen. Are you willing to bring this deal down to get into power?
It's not about bringing the deal down to get into power. It's about opposing a deal which isn't good enough for the British people. As I've said before, we respect and accept the outcome of the referendum, but what we don't accept and what we don't respect is this half-baked deal, which is really the worst of all worlds. I think it's clear that Parliament's going to be sharing that view this time next week.
The point is that this is the conversation that has been going on for so long, and what the British people are hearing are saying this deal's not good enough and so forth. This is the only deal on the table, and there's nothing from the other 27, there's nothing from Barnier, there's nothing from anyone that says that whether there was a Conservative government, a Labour government, a coalition or whatever, there would be any other deal. The deal that's negotiated is the only deal.
Well, the European Union in the past has thought again on things like Lisbon, and the fact is that Dominic Grieve's motion that was passed today, his amendment, actually shows that there are ways in which Parliament can make its voice heard. The problem is that the Prime Minister has really been spending the last 2 years negotiating with her own party instead of actually putting forward something that can bring the country together and bring Parliament together, command a majority in Parliament. What she can do, and this is what I'd advise her to do, is to put forward Labour's proposal for an alternative deal. That would not only command the support of the majority of MPs, it would actually crucially bring the country together. There's been too much division in this country over this important issue. So we now need to bring people together and move forward.
Well, I'll just very briefly talk to you about the possibilities of what Labour might put on the table. Before I do that, either the unintended consequence, perhaps, for someone like you who would like to be Justice Minister, of the Contempt decision today was that perhaps if you became the Justice Minister, you would have to reveal the workings. You would have to reveal in full legal advice given to you by the Attorney General in a future Labour government. Would you be prepared to do that?
Well, it's quite clear when the House of Commons votes to request and demand that legal advice, then in those circumstances it should be shown to Parliament, and that's what we'd do. If Parliament voted to say that we should share advice, we'd share it, because we as Democrats believe in the importance of Parliament, we believe in the sovereignty of Parliament.
So let's just be quite clear, there'd be no circumstance in which you would try and block that. A Labour government would always accede to Parliament's demand for clarity of legal advice. We believe in the primacy of Parliament. So
if they were in the circumstances, as we have been here, where Parliament has voted to request that advice, to demand that advice, we'd show it. But what we've had here is a government and a Prime Minister with something to hide. And what they have to hide is the legal advice, which actually will lose even more support for their deal. And that is really at the root of the reason why they've tried to evade and avoid following the will of Parliament, which is a very, very serious condition, a serious circumstance, and that's led to the first time in history government ministers being voted by Parliament to be in contempt of Parliament, a really serious matter, historic for all the wrong reasons.
Well, without going through all the different areas of, for example, Labour 6 tests and so forth, you know, let's just ask a question here. What evidence is there, real evidence, that the people of these countries that make up the United Kingdom want a softer Brexit?
Well, what people want is anything other than what the Prime Minister is suggesting. What they don't want is this cliff edge Brexit. As I say, it's time to bring people together. But there's two things really. Firstly, the Prime Minister's deal can't command the support of the majority of members of Parliament, but then it can't bring the country together either. We want to understand and represent the concerns of those who voted leave and the concerns of those who voted remain, and bring people together. And Labour's plan for a permanent customs union, no reduction in workers' rights, environmental protections or consumer protections, and making sure all the regions and nations of the UK are treated properly, that can actually bring people together.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard Bergen. Well, now is the moment we've been waiting for. Our three eagle-eyed political commentators who hold the power, who polls the power after today's votes, will be asking them that and asking them how they might use it in the days and weeks ahead. We have a little visual help for them of what we're calling now our sort of high-tech Tower of Power. And let's start, Ian Dale, the Tower of Power. At the moment it sits with Theresa May, MP's Cabinet, Tony Blair, Civil Service Queen.
Tony Blair?
Sorry, Tony Blair. What a Freudian slip that was. That actually is probably the worst thing that Tony Blair's ever heard. Anyway, so let's see where you think the power lies at the moment. Let's see if I can. Right.
Well, I think if we were talking yesterday, we would have had Theresa May there. Probably MPs here, but possibly Cabinet. But I'm going to swap these over because I think MPs have exerted their supremacy today. And I think we're going to see that increasingly over the next few weeks, possibly few months. The Cabinet has not asserted its power so far, and I actually think the power of the Cabinet is going to be diminished somewhat. Now, if Jeremy Corbyn puts down a vote of no confidence next week, which I expect that he will do, he's probably going to come up here. But then, of course, you've got the very vexed question of the DUP.
Yes.
Now, Nigel Dodds, their Westminster leader today, he said in his speech that the government could not be certain of DUP support in a vote of confidence. Now, I imagine Jeremy Corbyn's ears pricked up at that point. So they are going to be, I don't know whether you can say the DUP is more important than the Cabinet, possibly not. But they could. I mean, they could be the ones that bring the government down. I don't know whether the tap of the £1 billion has been switched off yet, but it will be imminently.
They've got half of the money, I gather, that they were promised for support. But the DUP also said today they weren't running scared of a general election.
Well, no, they're not. Now, I think the media are going to have a big role to play in the next few weeks as well, because you've got the broadcast media, I would say, broadly sort of more Remainery, soft Brexit. But the print media are overwhelmingly, or were overwhelmingly before the changes at the Mail, in favour of quite a hard Brexit.
And now, of course,
so I think the media
flipped.
messaging is going to be quite important here. So let's stick them on.
Okay, you're sticking them there with the DUP, which I think is giving them a bit of power. Where do you think the civil services is their job done, or actually have they got more to do?
Well, I think the civil service power resides in a no-deal Brexit, because the civil servants are not going to have any holidays. There'll need to be a huge number of new civil servants to not just prepare for it, but to implement it. So it depends where we go over the next few weeks as to really the power that they're going to exert. But the civil service are always quite powerful, so let's put them above the Cabinet, shall we?
Oofed. You bring the civil service above the Cabinet and above the DUP, but the Queen is still here. She's a locus. Let's see. You've got a bit of space in here.
I'm going to put Jacob Rees-Mogg down here because the ERG, since that dreadful press conference that they held outside St Stephen's Gate, their influence has been on the decline.
So it's interesting that they haven't been sure-footed, have they?
They were up until that point.
Yeah.
I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think, had played an absolute blinder up until then. But
they got ahead of themselves.
They did get ahead of themselves, and a bit too much in the limelight. I think it did go to their heads a bit.
And have you any other people that you would like to put in this space here?
We've got Mark Carney, the Speaker. I think the Speaker, because we know kind of what his predilections are from the bumper sticker on his car, although it is his wife's apparently. But the Speaker played a role today.
Yeah.
He could play a big role come January, if we get to this January the 21st date. So I think we probably
And as a
put him here.
Brexiteer, how do you feel about this configuration?
Well, as a Brexiteer, I'm not going to complain about parliamentary sovereignty because that's kind of what it was all about.
Yeah, it was all about taking back control, and you took back control.
I don't feel very happy that Jeremy Corbyn could be on the verge of becoming
even
Prime
if I've
Minister.
called him Tony Blair.
Indeed. I mean, I tweeted this morning that, or this afternoon after those two votes, the words Prime Minister Corbyn edged a little bit closer this afternoon, and I didn't take a lot of pleasure in that tweet.
Bronwyn, thank you very much. Bronwyn, come on up and...
Thank you very much.
Right, you're going to move things around here.
I am indeed. All right. Do
you want a hand?
No, that's all right. That's all right so far. I agree with Ian that MPs are the top. I'm going to move them up, partly because I think they're even more important, but also to make a bit of room.
Right.
Right. I'm then going to take the DUP and put them up here.
Yeah.
Because I think that, you know, what we're talking about is the big likelihood that Theresa May doesn't win the first vote on this deal, that MPs of all kinds turn it down, at which point she is very likely into a no-confidence vote, which Labour would bring.
Yes.
And the DUP is absolutely crucial to whether she
so
wins
they want
that
a
or
lot
not.
more out of there.
Yeah. So I'm going to put them there. I'm going to put her next, and she is kind of, but I'm going to put her more central. She's still Prime Minister.
Yeah.
She still has the executive power. She still has control of the finance. She can do all these deals. But she's still running this.
Yep.
So she's there. What am I going to put next? I'm going to move. I'm going to come back to the civil service. I'm going to move Jeremy Corbyn right down because, yes, he's leader of the opposition, but his time really comes if he can. Supposing we're into a no-confidence vote, then
yes.
All right, then the cabinet and the media are going to be crucial, I think, for the sense of legitimacy. Does she have a right to be there? And those really are going to determine a lot of the mood around this. Then, all right, Corbyn is there, and he's. Yes, he's sitting there as leader of the opposition. He wants to try and trigger, get her to lose a no-confidence vote and try then to make the case that he should be forming a government, but try to trigger a general election.
What do you think of the ERG?
Down.
Done?
Down further. They've had a bad day, in my view. I think you are. I think their position has been weakened.
So you've got a cluster up here, you think. Jacob Rees-Mogg's shot his bolt.
I think Burker has John Burker, the Speaker, has a lot of opportunity to determine what amendments come through. Civil Service has obligations more than power, but the chance that the Civil Service would be needed to go back to Brussels and say, can we do something about this deal? And that's gone up, in my view. The Queen we've got at the bottom, that's right. She doesn't have a lot of power. No. I'm going to move her down further. She really doesn't have a lot, but that's probably more than she wants, because she could be in a very difficult position in this if Theresa May loses a vote of no confidence, tries to hang on. Jeremy Corbyn is saying, no, I should be forming the government. She's going to have to make a choice, essentially. That's not what she's going to want.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, OK, Paul Mason, come on down.
It's down and around, I have to go.
Yes,
apparently.
OK.
Right. I'm bringing in Mark Sedwill, the Permanent Secretary, because as long as Theresa May's got a majority in Parliament, he's her kind of conciliary, right-hand man.
Right.
But as soon as it's possible that she doesn't, he's her executioner. In the sense that, so I'm not going to cover the
You're
media.
going to agree with MPs up here in DUP here?
No, let me come to them in a minute. The critical thing I want to say is, look, dig out that movie Darkest Hour about May 1940. It's not, obviously we're not lost a war, but a government that's falling apart in power and can't fall does need, we're a constitutional monarchy, it does need, like happens with Churchill in the movie, you know, the monarch, and she was alive then, of course, or a child, to exercise their prerogative to ask Theresa May, do you have a majority? He will decide. And of course, the other thing is the civil service. I want to do one other thing. He and this lot do not even belong on there. Get rid of them. I mean, they've shot their bolt. It's over. Hard Brexit's over. And, you know, however, let me say one final thing about Jeremy Corbyn. Look, right now, he doesn't want to be anywhere near the top of this. He's under pressure from people in his own party to utilise this crisis to finish off Brexit. Not to do as Richard Bergen said there, but to actually go for the people's vote and go for a Remain. He doesn't want to do that. Because I think it would harm Labour's chances in any subsequent election. The other thing there as well, I don't think he'll call for an election.
Tell me, where's the power play with him and John McDonnell at the moment then?
But I don't think there is a power play between him and McDonnell. No. It's more about the even Momentum, which as you know I'm a member of, it's probably full of people who would love to take this opportunity to go for a people's vote and Remain. But look, this is this week. And I think a lot of the action after the 11th will be in this area. One other thing, Geordie Greig, the new editor of the Mail, the Mail's
remade the Mail.
The Mail has been Pravda for Theresa May since he took over. But I'm very interested because they have to sell newspapers to that very hard Brexit supporting set of people. If she can't get her Brexit through, Mog's off the scale. What do the hard Brexit supporting tabloids do? And what mood are they reflecting? I will be reading what they write with great interest because they do have their ear, in many ways more than the MPs do, to that section of Middle England.
Thank you very much. But before we go then, just come back to your seat and let me just get a sense from each of you. Brexit more or less likely today, Paul?
Less. A lot less.
That's interesting. Ian Dale? No,
I think a little less, but I do think we need to look at what Bernard Jenkins said there about the law, because the law is that we leave on the 29th of March, and if that's to change, the law has to change.
Bronwyn?
Less.
Less, much less. Thank you all very much for playing our Tower of Power game and for joining us on Newsnight tonight. That's all we have time for from